Hello, security pros. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on today's ESA webinar. Today, the webinar will be featuring Security America, your industry insurance resource. And during this webinar, you will learn more about the Security America program and how we can help you save money without sacrificing coverage. Security America has been the leading provider of professional and general liability insurance for the electronic security and life safety industry. As the industry grows and changes, we do the same, making sure we can offer you as many coverages as possible to address the exposures of your business. My name is Ana Magallon. I'm a marketing specialist for ESA, and I'm excited to lead this webinar today. Before we dive in, I'd like to provide some tips for those of you joining us on your first ESA webinar. You will be muted for the duration of the session, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. If a question or comment comes to mind at any point during today's session, click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and I'll ensure we save some time for your questions with our expert today. We'll also be recording this webinar so you can rewatch the on-demand session and share it with your colleagues. Tomorrow, you'll receive an email thanking you for your attendance today with a link to the recording. Also, calling all security pros who are ready to take your career to new heights. Don't miss out on the opportunity to join us at ESX 2024. It will take place on June 3rd through 6th in Louisville, Kentucky, and it is a premier event for electronic security and life safety professionals. With engaging sessions, valuable networking opportunities, and cutting-edge technology exhibits, ESX promises to be an unforgettable experience. We at ESA realize your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending some of that time with us today. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the program manager at Balance Partners, Crystal Jacobs. With over 20 years of experience specializing in developing, managing insurance programs, Crystal has a unique experience in evaluating, comparing, developing, and managing insurance products and programs, and has developed and taught multiple continuing education seminars, and has authored many new insurance programs over the past 20 years. All right, Crystal, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I see some familiar names there. So thanks you guys for joining. As noted, I've been managing insurance programs for well over 20 years. My expertise lies in comparing, developing, and managing insurance programs as well as contract review. I actually began working on the Security America program back in 2015 when I was at US Risk. And for the benefit of our current insureds who are on the program and are on the call, I am now at a company called Balance Partners. The Security America program has moved management from being managed by US Risk over to Balance Partners. I know a lot of you have been used to working with Rhett Butler over the last few years since I left US Risk, but just so you know, now he's over here at Balance Partners with us. So you have the original Security America team still continuing to work on the program. A lot of you may ask, what does this do for me when my insurance comes up for renewal? And that is really, it's just simply status quo for the most part. You're just going to be seeing Balance Partners rather than US Risk. There's no change to carrier rate coverage or form. All that remains the same. You might receive a letter from US Risk stating that you've been non-renewed. Please know this is not Security America non-renewing you. It's just US Risk is required by state statute to notify you that they are no longer the representative of the program, therefore they cannot renew you. But over here at Balance Partners, we can. Before you receive that, though, you should receive an email from us outlining what to do for your renewal, as well as where to send all of your information. So if you can make sure you're sending all requests to info@securityamericains.com, we'll be handling majority of the servicing of both current and renewed policies. So now with that out of the way, let's talk Security America and our affiliation with the Electronic Security Association. Many of you may be aware, and some of you maybe not, that Security America was actually developed by the Electronic Security Association and its members. It was really about addressing the fact that there was consistent misclassification of insureds. You guys were commonly grouped in with either electricians or other contractors that really didn't make sense. And what that resulted in was really overcharging and ultimately rate increases that didn't make sense for the industry overall. I love being affiliated with the association. It's one of by far my favorite associations actually to be involved with. Historically, as an underwriter, insureds that are engaged in their trade association make better risks. Not only does it show a different level of care for what you do, but it also provides you with access to so many amazing risk management opportunities. So I'm always encouraging people, whether they're new members or they're existing members, to make sure that they reach out to the membership team at ESA so they can ensure that they're using their membership to its ultimate maximum benefit. Because that really, if you're going to pay for it, you should use it every last little bit you can. So again, what is Security America? Like I said before, it was developed in 2003 by the Electronic Security Association and its members. And so I always like to say, like, this is a program built for you by you, which means a lot of things for us. It means that you guys basically have your own classification within this facility. And year over year, we're able to show that you operate differently. And that's important to underwriters that are backing the program. What that ultimately goes down the line to benefit you is stability in rates. So we have managed to, for more than 15 years, keep stable rates within the program. So whereas other industries are experiencing currently 30% plus increases in their premiums, we're able to pretty much maintain flat, and your renewals only go up or down based upon your revenue and your growth. So under the Security America program, I kind of like to break this up into two different things. So we have the main program, which is what was originally started. And then we have what we consider to be our ancillary products. So these are things that are not the original Security America program, but are coverage offerings that we're able to, through other relationships, be able to offer to you guys. Within the member program, the main program is where all of our cost savings are built into for members. So within the main program, we have obviously the general liability and the professional liability, which are both offered on an occurrence basis. You'll also hear professional liability referred to as errors and omissions, or E&O. They're synonymous with one another, but I do get a lot of questions coming back being like, where's our E&O coverage? Well, it says professional liability. It means the same thing. In insurance, we like to use the same terms, or we like to use multiple terms for the same thing. So super fun. We also have within that program our cyber liability product. This is very important. We'll get into more detail on it, on kind of the exposures that you face from a cyber perspective. And then additionally, within that program, we do excess and umbrella coverage. And we'll talk more in detail about the difference between excess versus umbrella, but we do have up to 10 million available in limits for that. Outside of the main program, again, our ancillary products that we're able to offer are work comp. We can do commercial auto, but with the caveat that it does have to be in combination with work comp. And it's typically geared towards people who have smaller fleets. So typically about 10 or less vehicles on that. And then the other program that we have is our equipment and installers coverage and business personal property. And these are programs that are the actual coverage for replacement of property that's lost, stolen, or damaged. And so we'll get into the details on that, but that's not liability side. All that falls, your general liability. These are actual replacement of property. So under the general liability and professional liability, it's a combined policy, which I find to be extremely important on an occurrence basis. So there's two different types of policies that you'll hear about in the insurance industry, and not to get too insurance nerdy on you. But you have your occurrence policies and you have your claims made and reported policies. And all this drives back to is the date when something happened. Okay. So typical contractor policies are occurrence-based policies. But what you don't find usually is professional liability being occurrence. And it's important, and we'll go into more detail in a bit about why it's important for both of those to be occurrence. The other part is damage to rented premises. So if you're renting a premises and there's damage to it while it's rented to you, that's where that picks up. Medical payments, this is no fault. Think about somebody slipping and falling on your premises. It's one of those kind of, we're not going to ask questions. We're just going to pay for the med cost. It's a standard offering on most general liability policies. The other is lost key liability. So obviously your customers entrust you with the security of their buildings, which means they may provide you access to their building through giving you keys. Let's say that gets lost or stolen and you need to replace all the locks. That's what that coverage is intended to do. We also do blanket additional insureds when required by written contract or agreement. We find that this is a very, very common request, and we do hundreds of certificates every week, and it's very common for people to want to be named as additional insureds under policies. So we utilize the standard ISO forms that are typically accepted by everybody, which is the 2037 and 2010. And so those are included. We also do blanket waiver of subrogation, and we'll talk about what that is, but that is something that, again, as required by written contract or agreement. Then we have a set of coverages that are basically additionally available, some for an additional premium, some that are just, you need to ask us if you need them for a certain purpose. So one of those being primary and non-contributory coverage. That's something that is available, typically done at no additional premium, but again, it's as required by written contract or agreement. Designated projects, we'll talk a bit about what that is, but it's per project aggregate limit that's available for an additional premium. Employee benefits liability, again, available for an additional premium. Hired and non-owned auto liability, available for additional premium. And then employer's liability for our monopolistic states. And again, I'll go into detail on what each of those are, but all of those are available. There we go. So I talked a bit about general liability versus professional liability and why I think it's so important for it to be under one single policy. But let's talk about the difference, because this is a very common question I get. Like, why do I need professional liability? Why isn't it all just general liability? So I try my best because there's a very big gray area in contractors that's hard to define one way or the other, because it really is going to depend upon how the claim comes across. But general liability is typically intended for immediate damage or injury. You have an employee who is on site at a customer's residence and they step through a roof, they drill through a countertop, they drill through a pipe. You have a customer on site at your facility and they slip and fall. That is immediate damage or injury that is a result of you performing your services right then and there. Professional liability is the stuff that isn't necessarily immediate. It's stuff that is caused by something that you did, but isn't a direct injury as a result. So one of the biggest examples that we can always give is when alarms fail to signal for one reason or another. If the signal fails to get to monitoring and something happens, God forbid, a wrongful death or building burns down to the ground, whatever it might be, that is a professional liability exposure, that alarm failing to signal. The other thing is breach of contract. So you bid a job, you said you were going to do X, Y, Z, customer feels like you only did X and Y. That's a breach of contract, and that's something else that can be addressed under the professional liability portion of the policy. The other thing that can be done is actually camera angles. So if you think about it, you go into a facility and you're setting up all these various camera angles, and let's just say something happens to get missed, and let's say it's burglarized and they don't see where they managed to get in, they don't get any kind of footage of the perpetrator. That could also potentially be professional liability. So the biggest thing that we say, though, is that there is a huge gray area from a contractor's perspective. And so it's important to have it all under one policy because it limits the fight. If I am carrying both your general liability and professional liability policy, I'm paying for it one way or the other, right? So if they're both under one policy, if you write your general liability under one and your professional under another, then you have this potential fight of which carrier is going to step up to the plate. Who's it going to be? And so this really makes claims handling much smoother to have it all under one policy, so long as they both respond the same way and are both occurrence, which is important. You want them both to react the same way and have those same parameters. So going back to those additional coverages that we talked about, again, this is stuff I get asked a lot of, so I figured I'd address it here. What is an additional insured? It seems silly, but it is a question we get asked. And that is that an additional insured is about the vicarious liability. We are not actually covering those additional insureds for work they do. What we're covering them for is the liability affiliated with work you did. So if they get sued because of work you did, then that's what we're picking up, which is just the vicarious liability. Waiver of subrogation. So within the insurance industry, all policies have some kind of waive or some kind of language in them that basically allows them to go back against another liable party. So we have the ability to offer a waiver of that, which is pretty typical, or it's commonly requested within contracts for that waiver to be included in there. And so we will. And then primary non-contributory. Again, standard language within insurance policies is for some type of contributory language, which states that there is another policy that's applicable to the loss than we would share based on the limits. Primary non-contributory basically takes that out and says that I'm on it 100% upfront. Employee benefits liability, that has to do with you managing benefits for your employees. So if you have if you're doing health insurance, life insurance, 401ks, anything like that, there's liability affiliated with you handling that for your employees. And so that would address that. And then lastly is the hired and non-owned auto coverage. So on the hired and non-owned auto coverage, a lot of you guys might not have commercial autos and therefore not have a commercial auto policy in place, but you might have employees who are utilizing personal vehicles for work purposes, or you might be renting vehicles, and that's where this coverage would pick up. If you have a commercial auto policy in place, 9 times out of 10, hired and non-owned is already included under your commercial auto. So I encourage you to go and check that if you do have a commercial auto policy in place. I did have a question. Additional insured status and the pushback. You do want to push back. You don't want to create more liability for yourself because these are your policy limits, right? It belongs to you. So if an additional insured status doesn't make sense based on the work that you're doing, for example, if you are a 10th of a job and they're asking you to name everybody that is on site, then yeah, you want to push back on that. These are your policy limits, and additional insureds can eat away at your policy limits at the end of the day from a payment on a claim. So you do want to push back where it makes sense. And you don't necessarily have to give just because you have additional insured, blanket additional insureds on your policy does not mean that you have to give that to everybody. So absolutely, you still do want to push back because know that those are your policy limits. Hopefully that answers the question. And then lastly, going over excess and umbrella coverage. So that's another request that I get a lot on, should I carry additional limits? Why should I carry additional limits? And should it be excess or should it be umbrella? So first, let's address the why should I carry additional limits? In liability, it's tough for us to come up with what's called a PML, which is possible maximum loss, right? Property, it's easy. They do it based on zip codes, average value of properties. And so insurers can basically figure out, okay, that's what it's going to be. In liability, we're trying to figure out what is our worst case scenario loss and what does that look like from a value perspective. So if you look at it from the properties you're working on, it's a little bit easier, right? Because if we know that the average value of the properties that we're working on are less than $1 million and there's a total property loss, then, and we get sued as a result of that, then more than likely our $1 million in coverage is probably fairly sufficient to address it if it's truly, an egregious error on our part and all that. But if we're working on buildings that are in excess of $1 million, how many buildings is that? How likely, what are we willing to wager on that potential of a total building loss? And so we have to look at, if most of the properties you're working on are significantly higher in value, then you may want to consider carrying those additional limits in the event of a worst case scenario loss. And then we have the other end of that, which is probably the end that we all don't necessarily want to think about, but it's there, and that's the reality, is a wrongful death situation. So whether that be as a result of, let's say, a med monitoring situation that goes bad, or even on the auto side, a fatality accident, it's a real exposure. It's a reality that's there. And how do you put a value on a human life? And you really can't. But again, you go back to thinking from a financial perspective, what am I willing to risk? What can I take from a premium standpoint in order to carry these higher limits? So it's just things, it's one of those things. It's tough for me to tell somebody, yes, exactly, you have to carry these, because it is ultimately a business decision, and it is a bit of a gamble on saying, no, I don't think I'm going to have one of those worst case scenario losses. But that's what I tell people to generally think about. So when we're looking at excess is only extending the limits of your professional liability and general liability policy. Okay. And when I say extend limits, we're not talking excess or umbrella does not provide you with additional coverage. It only extends the current limits that you have. So it still has to be a loss that would apply on the underlying. So excess is only over your professional liability and general liability. Whereas on umbrella is extending the limits of that, plus your employer's liability, plus your commercial auto, if you have that in place. So that's why umbrella is typically more expensive than the excess is. If you're somebody, or I guess here's one thing that I do see a lot of in contracts, they'll typically require saying, oh, you have to have umbrella in place. But if you look at the insured, they don't have employer's liability coverage and they don't have commercial auto coverage because they don't have either of those exposures. So that's one point where you could go and push back on the customer and be like, hey, it doesn't make sense for us to have umbrella coverage, but we can carry excess. So just a point to think about. If you don't have that employer's liability exposure, if you don't have that commercial auto exposure, then consider just excess coverage, and then push back on those contracts that are trying to require umbrella. What we find 9 times out of 10 is that no one really, or the people that are going through the contracts and trying to require certain coverages are using a broad brush approach rather than looking at you as an individual contractor. So always review those and push back on those if it makes sense. So the other coverage that we'll talk about is cyber liability. And we'll get to talking about what we consider to be SME business, and talk about what that means. But from a very high level exposure, one of the number one types of cyber claims that happens is ransomware. And I can tell you sitting right here today that I need more than both my hands to count how many people in your industry have had ransomware attacks. It is a very, very, very real exposure. The average cost of a data breach in 2003 reached an all-time high of $4.45 million. I understand that does obviously include very, very large breaches that are nationwide that people have definitely heard about. A current one that's going on right now is Ascension Health Systems is having a huge ransomware attack issue. But so I understand that means that. However, if we look at the cost per record, that average will still stand true across all levels of business, right? And so that's $165 per record. And that record is your actual customer data. But it's more than just that, because it's not just your customer data that's exposed, it's your business as a whole, okay? So a lot of people try and say they're not big enough for a cyber claim. Baloney, you are absolutely big enough. I always tell people if they want to hack into your personal Facebook account, guaranteed they want to hack into your business, okay? 98% of all cyber claims impact small to mid-sized enterprises. So those are guys who are, those true small business, small entrepreneurs. That's That's what we're looking at with majority of these. The reason that they are actually typically focused on is because they tend to not have as many safeguards in place related to cybersecurity, whether it be from a cost perspective or just from a knowledge perspective. It makes them easy targets. So 33% of those of SME claims are ransomware attacks. So again, we're still dealing with those ransomware issues. And you can see right here, the cost of it is utterly, I mean, just outstanding. What is a ransomware attack? Just as a brief explanation, is essentially you or one of your employees gets an email, clicks a link, opens an attachment, goes on a website on a work computer, clicks a link right then and there. Somebody gets access to your system and they lock you out and demand you pay them a certain amount of money. Otherwise, they will release your data, not give you access to your system. And that obviously takes time, money, energy to handle that entire event. So the benefit of the cyber coverage that we do, other than simply the financial burden that it lifts from you, is the expertise that's provided as a result of it. Our carrier for cyber is Beasley, who is literally like the original provider of cyber insurance in the United States. And their panel of experts is unsurpassed. So as soon as there is an event, they are there to help you through it. They are coming in, doing all kinds of audit and scrubbing of your system to try and find where it actually went wrong, essentially. And help you handle that, from even talking to your customers or whatever needs to happen, helping with figuring out monitoring, notifications, whatever's required by law. So it truly is just a really, really amazing product. But I always tell people, don't think that you're not going to get hit. It is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. So moving over to our ancillary products, we have a work comp program that we write with AmTrust. Just so you know, AmTrust is one of the nation's largest writers, specifically for small to mid-sized enterprises on workers' compensation. They have a great amount of flexible payment options, easy quote process. They've allowed us to utilize our application for a lot of the information needed for quotes. So it means that when it comes to comp, you're answering maybe 4 more questions, and then we're able to get a comp quote done. If you're in a monopolistic state like Washington or Ohio or the other ones, the employer's liability can be still written under the main program. So the commercial auto that we do as a part of the package with the work comp, or we're able to do as a part of the package with the work comp, is again through AmTrust. Again, similar situation as far as we're allowed to use a lot of the underwriting details that we already get in our main application. So it's a fairly painless process. I do tell people how, full disclosure on auto, if you are currently with your auto carrier and you're not particularly displeased and you're not experiencing in excess of 20% rate increases, you might be best to stay where you are from an auto perspective. That market right now is a bit upturned. And so I know everybody has probably been just really reeling at what they've seen on their auto renewals. So but the reality is it's just a really tough market. Carriers are struggling to make commercial auto profitable. So I'm not saying that I can't save you any money, but I am saying that it's, if you're particularly pleased with your current auto carrier, definitely consider kind of waiting it out with them. Lastly is the contractors, equipment coverage, and installers and business personal property. I kind of tie all these into one because it's all offered through Nationwide. We actually have in-house underwriting and binding authority through our Inland Marine group, which is Impulse. Inland Marine is it's an insurance term that never really made sense to me, to be honest, but essentially it is just property coverage. So on the contractor's equipment coverage, what this is doing is covering you for lost or damaged property on either a schedule basis or a blanket basis, but it's your tools and equipment that you're utilizing, right? So when we say blanket or scheduled, a blanket basically means that we're insuring everything at a set per item limit. Okay. And so the limit options that we have are $500, $1,000, $2,500, and $5,000. From there, when you're looking at that, what you want to say is, okay, I'm going to choose majority of my items are $1,000 or less in value. So I'm going to stick with that limit on the per item. So any equipment that you have that is valued more than $1,000, you're going to want to schedule on your policy. So you make sure that you get the appropriate coverage for it. So it's fairly simple and straightforward on it. Again, application process, super easy because we're able to utilize majority of our underwriting information. So it's a small supplement. So that's the equipment part. The other thing that this does is covers you for rentals. So, when you step up to the counter renting equipment and they say, do you want the insurance? If you have this coverage, you get to say no, because this covers you for your rental equipment. On the installation floater, this is equipment that's meant to be installed. So you have all of the stock that you're taking over to a customer site and it's sitting on customer site waiting for you to finish the job, right? It's there, and before you hand over care, custody, and control, you are responsible for that, right? So it's you before you tell him, dear insured, I'm walking away, cleaning my hands of it, I'm done. You're responsible for that equipment. So what this does is if that equipment is damaged or lost at a customer site, it would pick up the coverage. It would pay to replace that equipment. So that is what the install floater is. And then lastly, we have the business personal property. So in contractors world, you have all your actual contractors equipment and tools and stock, and that's all the stuff that is necessary to do the job, right? The other stuff is all of the stuff that's in your office, your computers, your office equipment, basically the furnishings, whatever it might be that's actually in your office. It's not necessarily the stuff that you're utilizing at job sites. It's just office stuff. If you rent your space, you don't own your space, because if you own your space, it should be already included under your property coverage. But if you rent your space, then business personal property coverage would address any loss of that type of equipment that you have. So when we are underwriting for this, what we're going to ask you for is the total value of all the stuff that you have within your office. And once you give me that, then that's what we're utilizing as a basis for the limits. So be thinking about that. As far as, I think it's kind of tough for some people to sit there and try and figure out, okay, the value of a rug I bought back in 1999 that's still in my office or whatever it might be. But yeah, do be thinking about your business personal property. I know a lot of people do put it on like their depreciation list for tax purposes and everything. That's a great thing to provide us with. So that is, I know that I have gone through that, what feels like super quick. And I've probably insurance nerded out quite a bit. But I did want to make sure that I was able to address everybody and kind of just give a synopsis of obviously the things that we're able to offer now under our new home, as well as reassure those that have been with our program that there are no changes from a rate perspective or anything like that. It's simply day-to-day management. I'm super happy to be back with Security America and working with you guys. I mean, I wholeheartedly can say this is one of my very favorite groups to work with. And I'm also extremely glad to have Rhett under the same house with me again. So I know the team will be absolutely amazing. So why choose Security America? Obviously, I've said it before, I'll say it again and again and again. This was built by your industry for your industry. So you can't find a program that understands what you do more. The cost savings, if you're an ESA member, that's absolutely significant. In the month of April alone, we saved people nearly $100,000. And to be honest, that's pretty standard, the minimum that we usually wind up each month saving members. So it's a big time savings. At a minimum, it will cover the cost of your membership. So if your insurance is already essentially paying for your membership, then get in there and figure out how else you can use that membership to your benefit, because there's so many other savings programs, but more than that, there's so many other opportunities to better your business and better your understanding of the industry as a whole. Servicing is another thing. We do pride ourselves on quick turnaround. We have an online website that you're able to go to, and I do encourage people to go to that, because you might be able to pull your own certificates of insurance if they meet certain parameters. But if you go to that website, regardless of whether it meets the parameters or not, it sends me a notice telling me that either a cert has been generated or that I need to do a certificate. So I encourage people to go and utilize that website. And we also offer contract reviews. So whether you want me to look at it as a purpose of evaluating it compared to your coverage and if you're carrying enough limits, or you want me to look at it to tell you the things that I think you could probably push back on, that, happy to do those contract reviews. And the other thing is coverage comparisons. If you either have a competitive quote or you're with another company and want us to take a look, send me over your current policy. I'm happy to look at everything and be able to tell you where we can pick up, or even if we do fall short on some stuff, I've always an open book on it, and we'll be straightforward with it. I did get a question and explaining E&O. So E&O is errors and omissions or professional liability. And essentially it's that non-immediate damage that is going to be addressed under there. So if the best example I can give is an alarm not sending a signal is probably the best example that I can give of a potential professional liability exposure. And that's the difference between that and the general liability. General liability is about somebody stepping through a ceiling or causing immediate physical damage to the place that they're at while they're doing work. And then, so now, what now? If you guys can make sure that any request that you're sending, please send to info@securityamericains.com. It's very important to utilize that email, particularly as a result of the transition, and just because we're able to make sure that things get handled in a timely manner. Whether it doesn't matter if your policy is currently with US Risk and still in the middle of the transition, or if you're already renewed with us, send everything to info@securityamericains.com. If you would like to get a quote for your insurance, you can go to securityamericains.com/request a quote. And put in all your information, and we'll work on getting you terms at. Or if you just want to talk and go over your coverage needs or any other questions you have, you can always reach me at the 866 number. And yeah, that's it. I appreciate everybody's time. Do you have any questions?
I do see one other question here, Crystal. I know you touched on this a little bit, but what do I do if I haven't heard back regarding a certificate of insurance request?
Okay. If you haven't heard back on a COI request, please make sure that you reach out to us either phone or email at the info box, because probably what has happened is you've sent your certificate request over to US Risk. And so we are currently working with them on us handling majority of those servicing items. And so we want to make sure, obviously, if it's something that we can handle, we want to handle. If it's something they need to handle, then we keep eyes on it and we're able to keep up with them and make sure it gets turned around in a timely manner. So just make sure you're sending it to info at, otherwise just give me a shout and we'll go over it and figure out where something's at.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Crystal. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think that's everything for today. Thank you everyone for joining the webinar. We will have the recording up and live within the next day or two on our website. So please feel free to check that out. And thank you so much for your time, Crystal. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover?
Nope, just give us a shout. Reach out. That's what we're here for.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week.